Hello, everyone. My name is John Edwards, and I am back here by myself. It is a dad drinking bourbon episode with Charlie and Andy Nelson from Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery. If you listened to the first episode, or if you haven't listened to the first episode, you should go back and listen to it. It's a lot about the history of how the distillery came to be, everything that happened in their family to get them to where they are now. But I'm sitting here in the conference room of Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery with the guys, and I can smell the still. They are cleaning it out after a run today, and it smells amazing. We have everybody in Nashville loves these guys. We have a fully signed Titans jersey, a fully signed Preds jersey, and a fully signed Sounds jersey up here. This room is pretty impressive. This distillery is pretty impressive. And these two gentlemen are pretty impressive. Thank you for spending some more time with me, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us again.
Absolutely.
I can't get over that smell.
See, I love it too, but I'm nose blind to it at this point. I know that they're doing it because I can see them and I just ran out there. But yeah, I mean, it's unless I'm like right up next to it, but it's just one of those things where it's unfortunate. But
my favorite is walking back in the barrel warehouse and just sniffing on some of the barrels over there.
There's a Bourbon Ball place out of Kentucky, and it doesn't taste like bourbon. It tastes like that smell in a warehouse.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's like art.
Art Eatables?
Yeah,
in Louisville, right?
Yeah.
Downtown. Yeah, I've been there. Their stuff is great.
Their bourbon balls were made out of Willet, or maybe you could buy it.
Yeah, they do it with all kinds of different brands,
and it tasted like a warehouse. It didn't taste like the bourbon. It was so good.
It's killer.
Long story short, this is going to be kind of one of those episodes where we get a little bit dorky. We talk about those smells, and we talk about everything that you guys have from a whiskey point of view. We might drink some whiskey here. We talked about the history last episode. Now you started getting on it, Andy, on the finishes, and the sherry was your first finish. But if you think about everything you guys have done, you have the straight Bellmead bourbon, the single barrel Bellmead bourbon, you have a sherry finished Bellmead bourbon, cognac, Madeira, and the Black Belle. The Black Belle was a one-time gift shop release. On the Nelson's brand, you have the 108 Limited, the 108 Single Barrel, which you can both get in the gift shop, and then the Greenbrier Tennessee White Whiskey. It's a lot of stuff, as you were talking about getting the brand up and running. That's a lot of stuff to have, in your repertoire. Is that a little bit going after your great-great-great-grandfather, having the 30 different products in the line?
Well, partially. I mean, when you say them all kind of like right one after the other, yeah, it does seem like a lot. And even when you go into our gift shop, you can see the variations of all the different products that we've got. So
and that's not a bad thing.
Oh, no, not at all. But you're right. I mean, part of we kind of want to kind of toe that fine line between, Charles Nelson, our triple great grandfather, had kind of one thing that was important to him was do one thing and do it well, which there's a lot of value in that. The other thing is, he also produced, I think Charlie mentioned this in the previous episode, about 30 different labels. And so we kind of want to walk that line between doing things very well, but also being able to slowly grow our portfolio. And so yeah, I mean, the white whiskey, the Bellmeads, all the variations of those were, our first things. And the sherry cask finish was we came out with the classic, and then the sherry cask finish, and then the single barrel. And then after that, we added the cognac cask finish and the Madeira. And so the order of them is all just kind of an evolution of where our head is at, in terms of what we're producing. And then, of course, when we got our own, still up and running, we released the white whiskey. And honestly, we only sell that in the 375 milliliter bottles and only here at the distillery. And a lot of that is more of an educational piece to show people, here's what it's like off the still. And of course, it's at 91 proof. So it's not straight off the still uncut. But we cut it to 91 proof so that when our aged whiskey comes out, which, of course, now the 108 has come out, kind of showing people one next to the other. Here's right off the still, and here's after a barrel aging for a couple years, and kind of just showing people this is what the barrel really does to it in both color and flavor. So,
and good for cocktails too.
Mm-hmm.
That new make, I really think, can add to a cocktail if you don't want to use some of the whiskey you might be accustomed to drinking in a different way. Having some new make in there can really spice up a cocktail a little bit. You brought up the sherry was your first one. A lot of people I find go for a port in the wine finish whiskey first. What brought sherry to you saying that's the thing we should go with first?
We considered a port finish because exactly what you're saying, that it's, it was a bit perhaps more common, although not a lot of cask finishing was all that common at the point that we started the sherry cask finish. And the sherry cask was an Oloroso cask. We tried it out. We just thought it worked great. And it was one of those things where we got very lucky, in some ways, but it was just maybe one of those serendipitous moments where we're like, let's not try to overdo this. Let's try this first, see how it goes. And it's come out as it has. And it's just, I love it. It's this magical sort of mixture of the whiskey that forms so well with the kind of creamy sherry, nutty vanilla, aftertaste, the finish of that, of the sherry cask.
And I think that's something you guys over the past year, at least for me, you have this reputation for really, really good finishing and then the really, really good single barrels. Obviously, finishing is a skill, right? So how have you honed that as you've gone through? What have you really found is the trick to getting that good finish? Is it finding the good barrels? Is it the way that you actually store them, how you actually put everything in? What's the science behind it?
Well, it's a little bit of all that. Of course, as with anything, you got to have the right ingredients, or else it's just not going to end up as good as you want it. And so getting the right barrels is one thing, and then it's just taking care in what you do and making sure that you check it every now and then to make sure it's coming along as it should be. And so all of the whiskey business is kind of a long-term thing, and there, nothing just happens instantly. And so part of it, there is a bit of trial and error in it. We try to make sure that we source the finishing casks the right way so that it's hard to go wrong with them. And so that's kind of a trick in itself. But knowing that, we taste, say, the first of this batch, and then we say, okay, this is good, this is great, this is what we'd like to improve on next time. One of the things that we have kind of mixed up over the years is the proof at which we put the whiskey back into those finishing casks and kind of cut it down to a little bit lower proof so that it picks up more of the essence of those casks as it finishes. Because we only do the finishing for, depending on the usage of that finishing cask, anywhere between 2 and 6 months. And so, of course, that depends. Generally, first use of that cask is closer to the 2 months, and then second use is 3 or 4, and then third use a little more. And so, just one of those things. But a lot of it is trial and error, but just making sure that you're conscious and taking care of it, as with anything. I mean, you're cooking a kitchen. You don't want to just kind of put something on autopilot and hope it turns out all right at the end. You got to, keep a careful eye to it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you might find something in one run that really helps you on another one, but didn't help you on the run that you were on. So I understand that a lot of it is the scientific method, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the finishing casks, and we probably talked about finishing a little too soon. We know that those casks that you get to finish, they might rest in there for a few months. They had a previous liquid in there before, whether it's a wine or a stout. But let's take it back to the birth of the bourbon itself. And we know that doesn't happen here. It happens at a source contract distillery, with the exception of your Nelson's line, which is being born every day. I just saw one go through charcoal finishing out there. But let's go back to when you actually assume those barrels from the contract distillery. How early in the process do you get to do that? When does it actually come live here in Tennessee is more what I'm getting at.
So there's kind of a multi-part answer to that. And we've kind of evolved as the company has grown and as we've taken on more space and everything like that. But initially, the first few barrels that we bought, they were aged they were already a few years old when we bought them, and they continued to age until we bottled them. And, the classic Belle mead is, generally 6 to 8 year old bourbon that is mingled together. we went from sourcing barrels that were a few years old to doing some sourcing and some contract distillation, where we would say, hey, you guys make this and this and that. And we would also have an agreement in place for the warehousing of those barrels. And now we do just contract production for Belle Meade, where we say, hey, make this and store it in your warehouses, and we'll pay you basically rent in your warehouses until we get our final permits and we can actually take everything in our own barrel warehouses.
So a lot of it's just a space issue.
Yeah. Yeah,
if we're getting down to the nuts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a major thing. And we actually just took over a space adjacent to us for more barrel warehousing. But, the goal is to bring a lot of that down from that warehouse space that we're renting, bring it into our own space. But along with the production that we're putting through, the barrels that we're filling here on site, that, warehouse space just fills up so quickly. And it's an issue within itself.
And with the new distillery that we're planning on building before too long, one of the first things that we'll do in all likelihood will be to build a big barrel warehouse.
That's got to be like the first thing, right?
Yeah.
That and the still.
Yeah.
If you got those two things, everything else will kind of fall into place. I think the other thing I would ask is those barrels that you have up there, how involved are you at this point? I think you were telling me before that they used to come down and bring you samples to your house. How involved are you in the process there now, or is it so dialed in after having years there that you give them the recipe and you pretty much know that's what you're going to get from them?
To start out with barrels that we'll say we buy them and they've already got some age to them, one thing that we won't usually do is buy a lot of barrels that we haven't had at least one or two samples of. So, pull a barrel sample, send it to us and say, this is what we've got available. And we'll, either say yes or no. As far as the new make that we contract out, what we'll do is have them take some off the still or right out of a barrel, or right before they put it in a barrel, and say, here's what you've got. This is your stuff now. It's going to go in a barrel. Here's the new make. And then, we can also request at any point, hey, can you take a sample of barrels A, B, and C, send it to us? What's the age? Where does that sit in the warehouse? Any kind of stuff like that. That's just kind of part and parcel of our contract or deal with them that says, we want you to make this stuff for us, but we own it, so help us out here.
I think throughout that whole thing, right, as you guys are growing as a company, the CEO of Ford is not out there on the plant actually building cars at a certain point. There was one part where Henry Ford did make the Model T, but eventually he then had to let that go to the production line.
Yeah,
I could only imagine for you guys that you were very, very involved and probably tasting everything. Now you guys are so big that if you were tasting everything, you'd be drunk all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important thing. And
You're saying we're not?
Well, that's why it's so important. Because look how eloquent we are and look how drunk we are. I mean, it is something that I think about a lot, is because as we have grown, and, we're still not like a huge distillery or anything like that, but as we have grown, my position, head distiller and, over the production and operations. And so from the very beginning, it was me and Goodlow, our production manager, and it was just the two of us for, almost an entire year, just the two of us. Too. Well, yeah, but and as we grow and get more people to kind of help do the work, it is, one person that I think is a very important piece of advice that I was given that frankly just took a lot of weight off my shoulders just hearing this advice was, I'd stress out so bad about like, oh, I've got to do this and I got to be out on the floor and also deal with the business development stuff and some of the sales and everything, because Charlie and I, we do a little bit of everything. I'd feel guilty if we didn't. One piece of advice that this guy gave me, who's very, knowledgeable and very experienced in the business world, and he said, look, when you're growing a business, you want to grow it. You want to hire people with the goal to make yourself unnecessary. if that makes sense, so that the business can run without you. If you have to go out of town for a week or a month, that it can still run without you. And that, I think that's very, very valid. It's very important. And it took a lot of stress off of my shoulders. On the other side of that, I don't want it to be running without me for a week or a month. I want to be out there doing stuff and making sure that it's running truly the way that it needs to be, in my mind. And so, did that even answer the question? I've now forgotten it.
No, I mean, at this point, hell, I think it did. It did.
Well, actually,
I mean, it was really kind of going to the fact that your involvement, and you were getting to it, not to interview you for you, but you were getting to it. As you move on, there are things that you probably did a lot more of that you have to kind of pass the baton so that you can focus on other things. And I think that's what you were getting at, is you're not the biggest distillery in the world, but you're not the smallest distillery in the world either. And if you think about what quote-unquote craft distilleries are like, not everyone is like, Nelson's Greenbrier. So where it was you and Goodlow to start, and Charlie was there, who knows what he was doing, but he was there. Now you're at the point where you probably kind of have to share that burden and give it to some other people and have them come report to you, and you guys are more the quote-unquote bosses. So there has to be a little bit of a change in the dynamic on that too, right? And just in sitting here and talking to these two gentlemen, and I will talk about stray observations later, but one wears his watch on the left hand, the other wears his watch on the right hand. So these are two different type of people here that just happen to be brothers, and one is definitely more analytical and the other is probably more idealistic, and when you're going with that dynamic, it probably has served you both well in the business capacity too, because you're coming at every problem from different sides and you each have your own specialties that you're probably good at. That being said, how has it been in transitioning to being the quote-unquote boss?
Yeah, well, to go back real quick, just in terms of specifics, because what I said before is kind of more anecdotal evidence of just, how things have grown. But there are certain things that I do not want to give up. And it's not a matter of a power struggle or anything. It's just simply a matter of, if Charlie and I have our name on the bottle, then I want to be damn sure that I'm tasting this stuff and making sure that the quality is what it ought to be, because it's not, any random production guy's name on the bottle. It's Charlie's and mine. And so there are things that, while some of it can be kind of taken over by folks that we train, which, by the way, is another very important issue, is training people the proper way to do things the way that you think they need to be done. But there are still things that I need to do, tasting the single barrels, tasting the final sort of minglings of different barrels and the finishes of each product, etc. So that's kind of one of the important things. But in terms of Charlie and I, you nailed it. Charlie and I are kind of opposites in terms of personality, but we do fit together really well. I'm assuming you were referring to me as the more kind of analytical, and Charlie is the other.
That's not what I got at all.
No?
I'm kidding. Yes, you guys are different, but it's almost like yin and yang, right?
Yeah, and it works really well because we're 16 months apart. We grew up, we shared bunk beds as kids. We know each other very well, but we're also, neither of us have a real sort of negative, but, we're not vindictive or anything like that. And so we understand that it's to everybody's advantage to work together. And I know I've talked to people. There's one guy in particular, I don't even honestly remember who it was, but he said, "Man, I'm so jealous of you guys because I tried to go into business with my brother and it didn't work out. And now we don't even talk to each other anymore." And that, it's just such a bummer. And so we're very fortunate that we work together well enough, and we can kind of take each other's word, with a grain of salt if needed, and understand that, like, we almost never agree on anything, but we understand each other's kind of position, and we know it's like, well, it's kind of his job to see it this way and mine to see it that, and often come together to create a really good compromise. And so it's very fortunate, and there's something kind of special about that.
I'm gonna let you finish, but this Black Belle is
Let's drink.
I just Kanye'd you. Man, we poured something while we were talking during the last kind of break, and I've been sitting here staring at it, and I realized I just need to go ahead and have this. This Black Belle, and this was a partnership you guys did with Blackstone, which happens to be right down the street. Mm-hmm. This is a stout finished cast strength. I think it's over 110, but not over 120.
111.5 proof.
Yeah, it's so good. This was a limited run that you guys had in the distillery. It was a gift shop release only. Oh, this is good. What are your plans with this, by the way? We're jumping around a lot, but will there be another Black Belle? Are there any other partnerships with local distilleries?
So this was something that, we, just to back up a little bit, the way that it started was every year we send some barrels over to Blackstone to age their Black Belle beer in. And they've been so good. The beer I love the beer. It's just delicious. And so if you haven't tried that out, you definitely should. For a while, Kent at Blackstone has been saying to us, hey, what do you guys think about distilling some of that beer? And what do you guys think about aging some bourbon in the barrels after we give them back to you? And just trying to do something. And so we tried distilling some of the beer. It just wasn't very good. It was pretty funky and not in a great way. And then so we took, and finished some bourbon in the Black Belle barrel. And it was almost like we almost even forgot about it until a group was in here selecting a single barrel, and they're like, hey, what's in that barrel over there? And like, oh yeah, that's finished in a Blackstone Imperial Stout Black Belle barrel. Can we try it? Yeah, sure. Here's a taste. And I'm like, man, this is really good. So anyway, all that to say, we love it, and it turns out a lot of people really like it, and we're going to do a little bit more. We're not going to do a ton more, but we'll do a couple more barrels, and I'd look for that. We'll probably announce the release of it, just like a day or two before we release it, but it'll probably be, holidays this year, and most likely just here at the distillery.
Now that we're friends, I don't want to beg on the air, but I'm begging because it will be forever there. I will have the tape. You guys are going to let me know, right? We'll talk. The thing I think I love about the Black Belle and getting into, we are whiskey dorks first and foremost, the smoothness of the 111 proof, and I think that is the most evident when you first taste it. I'm not getting any burn. I'm not getting anything, any hint of that 111 proof. It is so sweet on the nose. It's almost like candy. And then the stout doesn't hit you until the finish. And it really just resonates. It's one of the longest finishes, I think, for a finished bourbon I've ever had, and that stout just lingers and it's there.
Yeah, and I think there's a nice hint of like cocoa or chocolate in there at the end, and I think that's because the beer itself was actually infused with cocoa nibs as well, just in the actual brewing process. And so that definitely plays a part in that. But yeah, you're right. It sits there with you forever. And going back to what I was saying before about, me wanting to make sure that what we put in the bottle is worthy of having my name on it, in my own opinion, is, I want to make sure that we're not just putting a really sharp or tough barrel of whiskey or finished product or whatever it may be in the bottle. I want to make sure, this, despite it being 111.5 proof, it doesn't taste that way if you're tasting it blind. And that to me is the hallmark of a really good, say a single barrel or a cask finished product, the final product being easy enough to drink on its own without having to cut with water or whatever is very important to me. And so that's something that I really like being able to do in terms of final product.
And I have a hard time cutting things with water anyway, but I will say we have a firm philosophy, whatever you want to do to drink it, however it tastes good to you. You want a big ice cube in there, go ahead and put a big ice cube in there. I just prefer I know science has come out and said you should put a dash of water in there. Maybe it's laziness, and maybe it's just, I love neat. Probably because I don't want to have to go and get a measuring dropper out there and put a drop of water in there. I don't want to put too much in there that I don't enjoy it. I'm a dad. I'm lazy. I don't have a lot of time.
Well, and the other thing is science, regardless of how, whatever you may attribute or value science, of course, everyone should value science to some extent. But at the end of the day, science can't account for your individual taste profile. I mean, even things like sense memory is so important in tasting a whiskey, particularly with the nose of something, that it's like your senses, your aromas, olfactory senses, your flavors that you pick up are so tied to your individual experience that, science may say it's better this way, but you can disagree with that. And the fact is there are no wrong answers. And that's, to me, one of the really, really important things is knowing that no matter how inexperienced you are at drinking or tasting whiskey, whether you like it or not, you're not wrong,
Kind of the way that Zeke and I work with each other, because we don't agree on anything. And I think our kind of position is neither one of us is right, neither one of us is wrong. You're going to find whether or not you, and I told you guys when we weren't recording, the Black Belle wasn't Zeke's jam, but it was my jam. But that being said, you're either going to identify with my palate, or you're going to identify with Zeke's palate, or you're going to identify with none. Man, that Black Belle's just good, though. I love it.
What did you get? You've got some of the first 108 single barrel.
Yeah, I've been pouring stuff as we've been
which
sitting
barrel
here
is
talking.
that?
This is barrel number 44. This is 123 proof. Is this one you want to go with next?
Let's
might
go
as
with
well.
that
We're talking
next.
about it.
So this was released on, and it's funny, throwback to the first show, we never did get to the flag.
Oh,
but this was finished, or this was released on July 4th.
That's right.
Of last year. A callback to Charles Nelson's birthday. I was actually in Destin, Florida at the time on a family vacation, but I was very, very happy that the first thing I did when I came back was I came to the distillery and you guys still had some of this here. And it was the first 108 barrels of this make that you guys are putting out on your own. I have to say, really enjoyed the cask strength of this. I've been drinking it at home, but love the cask strength. I have not opened my regular limited edition yet. Just in full transparency, but I've loved the cask strength. So when you guys pulled out the cask strength, I was sold.
Good. Well, thank you. So this is, again, one of the important things is understanding the name is Nelson's First 108. So what we did, going back to our original plan in terms of building out the distillery and waiting 4 years and all that, like we talked about before, is that we knew that we'd have to try, well, we didn't know, but we figured we'd have to try to cut down the time, as is one of the number one major issues in opening a whiskey distillery. Is like, how do you reduce the time to get your product to market, right? Well, what we did was we decided to put some of our new make in 30-gallon barrels and some of it in 53-gallon barrels. And the plan was to kind of put basically half into smaller barrels and half into standard size, and then start releasing it at 2 years old and kind of blending it and mingling it together until we would sort of phase out the smaller 30-gallon barrels in favor of the 53s and like that. But what we found was that we, fortunately, so the 30-gallon barrels are not cheaper than 53s, and in many cases they're actually even more expensive. So it's a difficult proposition there for a businessman.
Well, and not to get us down a rabbit hole, which is always kind of fun, but there are some people that go for the 30 and the 23 and the 10 gallons to try to expedite the aging process. Is that anything that you guys thought of here, or was it more of just a size component?
It wasn't. Like I said, our original plan was never really to do just 30-gallon barrels or just smaller barrels. It was, again, to kind of mingle them in with the 53s so that we can kind of mitigate the difference between the two. And so, but what we ended up finding out was that we figured out a way to be able to reasonably not even have to use the 30-gallon barrels anymore. Of course, at the point that we figured that out, we had already filled about, as it turns out, 108 of these 30-gallon barrels in favor of all 53s moving forward. And so what we did was we took these 108 barrels, and we're waiting until they're at least 2 years old to release the whiskey, and we're calling it Nelson's First 108. Not only obviously because there's 108 of these barrels, also, and again, purely coincidence, we happen to release it 4th of July 2017, 108 years after Prohibition shut the distillery down. So the number 108 kind of made some sense. And we didn't even mean to, but that's the way it turned out. So once these 108 barrels have all been dumped out and filled into bottles, that's the end of it. Everything from there on out will be all in 53-gallon barrels and at least 4 years old or older.
And are you going to move to 750 milliliter bottles at that point? Because these are 375.
Yes.
Yeah, we will definitely be doing that.
Yeah, so these are like a piece of history. They're commemorative sort of bottle, and we're basically selling these staggering releases of batches and single barrels over the next year or so until we run out, and at that point we'll be releasing our full-on Greenbrier Tennessee whiskey.
So it won't be Nelson's 108 at that point, it'll just be Greenbrier?
No, yeah, it'll be Nelson's Greenbrier Tennessee whiskey at that point.
The
same recipe, just different barrels.
Yeah, the first 108 brand, if you want to call it that, will effectively no longer exist.
I think there's a theme going on here, and I don't necessarily think that's the charcoal filtering, but it's just, it does not, this one's 123 proof, 61.5 ABV, and it does not taste that way to me. I don't even feel it in my chest when I have it. It's very smooth, little tingle on the front, but some good hints in there of all the stuff that you look for, with a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of toffee in there. Not necessarily a bunch of butterscotch. It's not going to coat my tongue, but it doesn't burn at the same time. I feel it a little bit in the front there. It's just amazing to me how smooth that is. It's almost dangerous because you can sit there and have about 4 or 5 of them and then kind of get up and
be a little wobbly.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly appreciate that, and I love hearing that. And again, this is something that ultimately was, our distillers and production team kind of help taste these barrels and figure out, which ones should be meant for single barrel to be by themselves. And then, I'll make the final decision. But, not every barrel tastes like this. I mean, there's a very specific and definite reason we chose the individual single barrel. So, I mean,
let me stop you there for a second, because you're actually jogging my memory of something that I would be very angry if I left here and didn't ask you. You as head distiller, what are you looking for when you look at barrels and when you look for single barrels? Are you more of a mouthfeel guy? We know your nose is shot. You already told us that. So how difficult is that in then finding what you're looking for? Because my nose is always shot because I have a kid in daycare. But what are you looking for when you're actually picking barrels and picking what should be a single barrel and what shouldn't be?
I think generally my nose, I kind of take good pride in that. That's one of the things that I put a lot of value in the nose of a whiskey, because it's kind of the first impression, right?
I was joking, everybody. His nose works very well. He just doesn't smell angel share. Call back to an earlier joke.
Well, it's funny, actually. That's kind of like, you can't smell your own, say, body odor, but it's like you walk into a dorm room, for example, and you're like, this smells like a dorm room, but you don't smell your own. You know what I mean? And I'm nose blind to our production floor, but I go into a different distillery and they've got a different sort of signature fingerprint of their own style. But basically, to answer your question, what I look for is I choose this whole process is a really interesting blend of art and science, and each has its own merit. What I choose to look at is I take a lot of stock in kind of first impression, trust your gut, right? And it's very important to analyze things to the fullest extent necessary. But what I think is the most valuable way to do it is not to think about it too much. I want something that's well-rounded, that has a nice nose, a nice palate, and a nice finish. I would say that my favorite element of those three for any whiskey that I get most sort of impressed by is the finish. Because that's, nose is the first impression, but the finish is what you're left with and wanting more if it's a nice finish. And so to me, a single barrel has to have all those three elements, but I don't sit there and taste this single barrel 5 and 6 times and be like, oh, is this you get thinking about it too much, you get in your own head, and it just you become less confident in it. And to me, there's a lot of value in just like, bang, here's my gut instinct. This is what it tastes like. Here's what it hits me at first. And that's what I want to choose. So.
And that makes sense. I mean, if you think about everything we've talked about so far, what you have done with the finishes, the sherry, the Madeira, the cognac, the Black Belle. I mean, the finish on the Black Belle, I can't say enough about that. And I love the cognac one too. I think that one has been really nice. And I'm not saying this because I'm in the room with you guys. Some other cognacs I've had, they're really good on that first open. And then you let it air out a little bit, and those finishes can kind of wear off very quickly. Mm-hmm. I've appreciated the fact that, that cognac one has held up while it's actually been open. Mm-hmm. So that's a big positive for me. What other things, you guys might be releasing a honey this year at some point?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So I'd like to point out what we've got here. It's a totally different product, but what I've got a bottle of sitting here is called Right on the Honey. It's a specialty honey spirit, and shout out to the National Honey Board. They got in touch with us probably about a year ago and said they're having their first Honey Spirit Summit here in Nashville this past October, and they said they got in touch with us, and I believe it was Corsair and Nashville Craft Distillery here in town to make a honey spirit specifically for this Honey Spirit Summit, which they'd never had before. And they said basically no rules, just we'll provide you with some honey if you want, make a honey spirit, do whatever you want with it, get creative, get weird. And so we said, great. And we have a couple distillers who have, played around with, mead and things like that, had a little experience with fermentation of honey, etc. And so
your brother wants some.
Yeah, here you go. So what we did was we asked for buckwheat honey, which is a very, very interesting, very unique, very bold honey. It looks like molasses. It's black. It's dark. It's very, there's almost a barnyardy aspect like you get in some sort of farmhouse or saison ales. And that's the honey by itself. What we did was we actually took the honey, we fermented it. We didn't use any grains in this. We just fermented the honey over between 21 and 28 days. We distilled it a couple times. We put it in a used whiskey barrel, and then we put some jasmine and juniper in it. So it's a real weird thing, very outside the box for what we do. And then we put it in the bottle. It's I don't know. Every time that I taste this, I get a different thing from it. It's just real weird.
Got a slight burn on the front. It's 100 proof. For those of you, I've been pouring it while Andy's been talking.
We only made a couple, 5 cases of it, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I almost hesitate to even talk about it on here because it's not actually even available for sale anywhere.
Well, it's just kind of fun that I could say that I've had it.
But and this, by the way, is totally different from the honey thing that you were talking about. So yeah. This is almost like a gin. It's more akin to a gin.
But I don't even think it tastes. It doesn't taste very ginish.
Not at all.
But this is one of those things where people say, "Why do you actually have a podcast?" I'm like, wow. I got to try this stuff, and you can't get this in the stores. Spicy and sweet at the same time is the best way to describe it.
I what I said, I get a different thing every time I try it. But one thing, if you focus in and you just think of jasmine, right, you can kind of pick up the jasmine. And our idea was that, we wanted to put the juniper to make it a little bit ginny, but like you said, you really don't get that much of the juniper at all. It's mostly the jasmine and the barrel aging. So the honey I honestly don't even know what to say about it unless you're just sitting here tasting it. So again,
well, no, I mean, I thank you guys for sharing. I think you should do more of it. It's kind of fun.
Well, we'll see.
It's expensive.
Is it? I don't think you should do more of it.
I mean, fortunately, we were given all the honey to make this, but it's really nice, expensive honey that we got, so I'm not sure. I don't know if we were to sell it, we'd probably have to sell it for $100 just to make our money back.
Well, a distillery only release.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
which is what the honey thing that you were talking about. Which I don't know how you even knew about that, but now that we
TTBs everywhere.
Gotcha.
And trust me, it's already made places.
Yeah.
So don't worry, it's there.
Well, to give you kind of the lowdown on that, so it's another special cask finish, and so what happened was, and it happened purely organically, where a company called True Bee Honey out of Franklin, Tennessee, asked us if they could have a used bourbon barrel to age some of their honey in. We said sure, and so they took our used bourbon barrel, they put their honey in it for a few months, and then they said, we dumped this honey out. And it was our favorite. It was really, really good. They gave us a sample of the honey, and they said, do you want this barrel back? And we said, hell yeah, let's see what we can do with it. So we took this barrel that had bourbon in it at first, and then raw True Bee honey, and then we finished some bourbon, some already aged bourbon, in the same way that we do our sherry, cognac, Madeira cask finishes, but with a raw honey cask. And it's still sitting there, finishing, so we haven't released it or anything yet. But it is it's tasting pretty fantastic. And the really cool thing to me about this is that it's totally just a one-off thing. It's very exciting. We're going to have a really cool label for it, but I'll kind of leave that to the imagination. And it's not, there's no honey like flavoring or anything like that. It's literally just raw honey that has been in a bourbon barrel with, finished bourbon going back into it and picking up the essence of that.
So any other finishes then, besides that honey that you're thinking of?
We've got a few other finishes that are pretty unique, and we'll be releasing those throughout the year. Those will be gift shop only. I don't really want to even talk much about them because they're going to be surprises, and it'll be something where we just, there'll be a press release that comes out probably in March or so that talks about the first release, and then we'll just basically over social media say, hey, here it is, it's ready, it's going to be in the shop tomorrow or in 2 days or something, and they'll probably sell out pretty fast,
which they typically do.
Yeah.
And other questions that people have asked, what about a rye?
We have time frame is totally up in the air, but we have been cooking and distilling rye whiskey for about a year now on a periodical basis. So what we do is we take 1 week of every quarter, and we do rye whiskey mashes for that whole week. So we put away, a decent amount of barrels. I want to say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 barrels a year of rye whiskey, kind of a staggered
So you're
fills.
telling me there's a chance.
Yeah, and that's for Greenbrier rye,
right?
And we've done a little bit of Belle Meade rye production as well. Which back in the day there was a Belle Meade bourbon, a Belle Meade rye, and a Belle Meade Tennessee whiskey. But we have done a little bit of contract production for the Belle Meade rye, whereas the Greenbrier rye we've done our own grain to glass production. Well, I guess it's not in glass yet, it's in barrel, but also back in the day there was a Greenbrier rye, and
I took a picture of it. We actually have a poll on Instagram right now, and I should check this while we're talking here. Is I asked people what would they be more excited about, the Greenbrier rye or the Greenbrier. 52% to 48% would be more excited about the Greenbrier rye over the whiskey that's out there.
Yeah.
Over the Tennessee whiskey?
The ones that you have out in the case out there. What was it, 1899?
Yep, 126 proof.
Yeah.
Whoever is your tour guide, they deserve a raise out there, because that group is having
they're having a good time on the other side of that wall there.
That's one of these ones where I feel like you two should just pull the door open and be like, surprise, you get to meet us on the tour. So there's a good chance a rye is coming.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Greenbrier Tennessee whiskey. How far away are we from having that come out? Because this came out now
a little over
2
a year.
years, so a year?
Yeah, so we're planning on releasing our Greenbrier Tennessee whiskey, which will be over 4 years old, close to 5, at some point in 2019.
So, Andy, have you dialed down the proof on that yet to where you want it? Or is it, we'll see when are we going to still have the cast strength and the limited release, or will we kind of one?
Don't know about that just yet. Yeah, because it's not fully matured yet. It's kind of just one of those things where we're keeping an open mind about it, and where it fits, it'll fit, and we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it.
I can't say enough about the stuff you guys have put out. I mean, I know a lot of people like to tell us we're homers repping the Nashville brands, but I think it's one of those things where you guys have a heck of a story. You have the whiskey to back it up. I think one thing kind of closing in this, as you move to the Greenbrier, is that something, though, where the Belle Meade brand will still be there and you will have the bourbon that is not charcoal filtered opposed to the charcoal filtered Nelson's Greenbrier too?
Yeah, so Belle Meade originally was meant to be sort of like a bridge to get us to the Greenbrier brand and to get us to building our own distillery and start production in-house. However, we love the Belle Meade brand, and, we've been doing some fun things with it. It is definitely our plan to keep that brand going while we are doing contract production of it today. The ideal plan is to bring it 100% in-house as well. That won't be able to happen until we've built our second distillery, much larger one, but we definitely want to do our own production on that.
Well, we can't wait to see all the things that you guys have. I'm sorry that you were just stuck with me, but I really want to thank you guys. This was a lot of time you spent with me this afternoon, so thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Absolutely.
It's been fun.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, follow these guys on NGB Distillery at Instagram. You can find them. Also, Belle Meade Bourbon, Belle Meade BRBN on Instagram. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter. They're on all sorts of places. Other fun things I should mention is it's not always, although you do have people, it's not uncommon to see you guys lurking on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So, every once in a while you see Charles C. Nelson has liked your post. And you're like, oh, man, Charlie needs something to do. But thank
That's
you.
All him. That's all
make
him.
sure you go find that these guys are out there. They're actually working. They're doing that stuff. Follow us, by the way, at Bourbon Dads on Twitter, at Dad's Drinking Bourbon on Facebook, at Dad's Drinking Bourbon on Instagram. You can find us on Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, Podknife, YouTube. It doesn't stop. And you can also find us on your other favorite podcast provider. Chances are we're there. Please leave us a 5-star review. Tell us you like us. If you don't like us, please tell me in person. Send me a direct message. I am happy to help you. Zeke says he loves you all. He's sorry he's not here. Guys, anything you want to say before we go out?
Love you, Zeke.
Yeah, we missed you.
Maybe one time you guys can give me a hug. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.